terminations are allowed, but only when the life of the mother is at risk. Well, we can now speak to our correspondent in Dublin, Shane Harrison. Shane, how's it looking at the moment?
Well, Joe, the polls suggest that the yes side, those who want to get rid of the 8th Amendment of the Constitution that gives equal rights to life to the mother and to the unborn, that they're in and around 50%. The polls also suggest that those who want to save the 8th Amendment are around a third of the electorate, with 50% undecided. Most people believe most of those undecided are probably soft no's, so both sides expect a really close result, and each side is urging its supporters to get out and vote on Friday.
Right. I mean, this is obviously a landmark vote in Irish history. What would a win for the Yes campaign mean for the country going forward?
Well, the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, has said that he wants a yes vote, that it's time for the Republic of Ireland to grow up as a country, to stop exporting its abortion problem and importing its abortion solution via the internet and pills. 9 women leave the Republic of Ireland every day for British abortions, 4 import pills via the internet without medical supervision and risking a 14-year jail term to end their pregnancy. Those on the no side argue that it's a human rights issue, that in any pregnancy there are 2 human rights at stake, that of the mother and of the unborn child, and they want people to save the 8th Amendment, saying that if the 8th Amendment is repealed, then there will be more abortion in Ireland.
Thank you very much. Well, we're joined here in the studio by the Liberal Democrat Deputy Leader, Jo Swinson. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Now, you've previously called Jacob Rees-Mogg's views on abortion, we were talking about it a little bit earlier, in terms of anyone holding high office. You've called them extreme. Do you stand by that?
I do think saying that a woman who has been raped, who has already been denied control over her own body on one horrendous violent occasion, to deny her control and choice over what to do with any resultant pregnancy, I do think that is extreme. And I think it's time that we recognise that women do not take this decision lightly. No woman takes that decision lightly. And women are the best placed to be able to make that decision, and we should trust women to do so.
Jacob?
Well, I think the issue is that there are 2 lives, and you have to decide at what point life begins. If you begin life begins at conception, then it is very hard to find any point at which it is right to take that life. And that's the issue they're discussing in Ireland at the moment. And I think the argument that the woman has an absolute right to choose ignores the fact that there is this second life.
I think the best person to make that decision is the woman. And as I say, no woman takes that decision lightly. Women who have made the decision to have an abortion, they do so weighing up all of those factors. But I think to force somebody to go through a pregnancy, I mean, I'm pregnant at the moment, and I found with my first child the experience of carrying and giving birth to a baby the most intense physically and emotionally experience I've ever had in my life, and it is amazing and exhausting in equal measure, but I would not force anyone to go through that against their will. I just don't see how in the 21st century we can think that that is an acceptable position when actually women in that scenario agonise over these decisions, trying to make sure they get it right, and they are best placed to choose.
I think the numbers are so terrifying. In 2016, 190,000 abortions were carried out in the United Kingdom. Now, most of these were not the hard cases, the issues of rape or of incest. They were effectively abortion on demand in very large numbers. And I think this is a great sadness, that it ignores the second life that has been created. And I think that second life ought to be taken into consideration, and the disabled life. That once a child is born, a disabled child is equally valued as an able-bodied child. Before birth, disabled children are routinely aborted. 90%, I believe, of Down syndrome babies are now aborted. So we don't value disabled life in the womb in the same way as disabled life once it's born. And I think that is just deeply sad.
Well, I'm sure, as with all of us would agree, it would be preferable to reduce the number of abortions. But I believe the best way to do that is through reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies. That's through better sex and relationships education, something which your government has not made a priority within schools, through better access to contraception, better access to advice. And there are those cases, which my understanding is, Jacob, your position is that even in those cases of rape and incest, you would still deny abortion. And, you know, we have horrendous statistics in this country. You know, more than 80,000 women in England and Wales experienced rape last year. So we have an epidemic of violence against women. And I have to say, you know, I do hear a lot of arguments about abortion and often from people who are much less vocal about that epidemic of violence against women, which we absolutely need to be tackling and so far is largely unchecked.
You're completely right on that violence against women is a most serious crime and ought to be tackled by the government and by the police in every possible way. Of course it should, and the two I don't think are mutually exclusive. But I would slightly question whether my view is that extreme, because it's clearly a view that has at least a third, according to your report, support in Ireland. It's a view that's much more commonly held than sometimes is given credit for. And opinion polling in this country is not as routinely pro-abortion on demand as you might think.
But pro-abortion on demand is different, as you yourself said, to wanting to have an abortion because you've been a victim of rape. Do you think there should be a distinction there, and that you could support and should support that distinction? Well,
I wouldn't support that distinction because I believe that life begins at the point of conception and that the right of the life is very, very important. And the Irish situation where you can, of course, protect the mother's life is absolutely right, because the duty is to protect life, and that's always been the standard teaching of the Catholic Church.
Except women do die as a result of this policy in Ireland. Women have been denied life-saving cancer treatment on that basis, for example.
That is absolutely not what the Catholic Church teaches. So
it's the impact of the policy.
The teaching of the Church is that life is important and that life must be preserved.
I mean, I may just say, I think there's also a slight double standard going on here in terms of what you say on this particular issue, Jacob, but then your voting record, for example, on the Dubs Amendment to take unaccompanied refugee children, or whether or not child poverty ought to be ameliorated and that child benefit ought to be available to families that have more than 2 children. I don't think you can pick and choose which children you would like to support.
You mentioned the Dubs Amendment on the refugee children who meant to come from Syria. Of the 850 children who came, 8 were from Syria. 8. It was not about children coming from Syria. I thought the government's policy was right of directly rescuing people from Syria itself and not taking in children who had got to a safe European country.
But so Joe's point is just about, I suppose, are you picking and choosing?
But as soon as you look at the detail, you see, with respect, that point actually falls, because I was very supportive of what the government was doing in providing refuge for people from Syria, rather than people who had already got to a safe country.
But the government has done so little on that issue, and I just think that there's often a lot of noise from people who are very interested in the in what's going on within a woman's womb, and much less bothered by the issues that are affecting children in terms of poverty in our country. And I think that the campaigns would be much better focused on those poverty issues rather than this restriction of what a woman should be able to do and make decisions about her own body.
We're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time, I'm afraid. Jo Swinson, thank you. Now, my guest of the day, Jacob Rees Mogg, was on the show earlier this month